What's going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our weekly course breakdown. This time, we've got the last leg of the Florida Swing, the Valspar Championship, and an event I was considering just staying home, not going there, but got the itch this morning to go ahead and book a trip. So we're going to be there over in Palm Harbor. So excited for that. But here in this video specifically, going to break down exactly what to expect from the Innisbrook Resort Copperhead course. Going to go through some of the course specifics, a hole-by-hole breakdown of exactly the kind of shots that these players are going to be facing, and then towards the end, the most important part of this video, going to go through some of the key metrics and comp courses around the PGA Tour that I'm using to identify some of my top DFS plays, and of course some of those outright bets. A lot to get into. Let's go ahead and get this thing rocking. Over in Palm Harbor, Florida, we've got ourselves an absolute gem of a golf course in the Innisbrook Resort, the Copperhead course, to be specific for this week. And it's one of the more challenging off the tee courses that you'll see, and a little bit unique from the visual perspective. A little bit more reminiscent of a North or South Carolina style course, where you've got the tree-lined parkland style holes with real dense forested areas, just 5-10 yards off the fairway. That's why it's so difficult off the tee. You miss a little bit there, and you're going to be chipping out sideways. And on top of that, this week we have extra gnarly rough. So rather than just 2.5-3 inch rough, we've got ourselves 3.75 inch rough, probably going to get closer to 4.5, maybe even 5 inches by week's end. So going to be a little bit more of a test here in 2023 than what we've seen in the past. So last year, the winning score there at 17 under par, probably not going to be in play this time around. We've got ourselves a par 71, a Larry Packard design, has been renovated a bunch of times over the years, and most of those renovations were added to make this course more difficult. And you've seen them actually go ahead and constrict some of the fairways, because last year they were playing about 28 yards wide. Well, this year they're listed at just 22 yards wide per the GCSAA site. So it's looking like they're trying to make this more difficult, more gnarly rough, also more narrow fairways. The greens are already small. They're only about 5,800 square foot, which is well below the tour average. And they tend to be some of the faster and firmer greens that you find down in Florida. It's towards sea level, right? It's one of the more wet climates we have across the entire country, so you usually have relatively receptive greens, but because of some of the record temperatures we've had down here in South Florida, I think we might be in for an even more difficult test when it comes to the speed of the greens. So listed at 12 right now on the stimp meter, but I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever if that Poa trivialis overseed surface gets a little bit more feisty by the end of the week. A few other things to note is that they usually have a relatively large fringe around all of the greens. They were 72 inches wide last year. Well, they were narrowed down to right around 21 inches this year, which is to try and bring the rough a little bit closer to the greens. They actually noted that on the GCSA site. They're also talking about the fairways being overseeded. So a few changes from year to year, the gnarlier rough, the little bit, the rough getting a little bit closer to the holes. It's looking like they're trying to make the winning score closer to maybe 10 to 12 under par. Perhaps even more difficult if the wind comes through. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of the carnage out there and how some of the changes affect the course. In terms of your scoring average, some of the metrics here, scoring average was 0.77 under par last year, which was slightly easier than your tour average score. I would expect that to get a little bit harder this time around because of some of the changes we've outlined. The driving accuracy was 65.1% last year. As they've taken the fairways from 28 yards down to 22, that is drastically going to go down, so probably going to be in the 50s. Down in terms of your greens in regulation, it was a 66.6% rate last year, which was just a little bit lower than your tour average. That will probably stay around the same number, perhaps go down a little bit just because of the, change in size of the fringe there. Something to note is that I'm getting these metrics from Data Golf, and Data Golf does include the fringe as a part of the green. So them taking it from a 72-inch fringe down to just a 21-inch fringe is going to impact their numbers quite significantly. So expect to see lower numbers across the board in terms of that, and probably harder conditions regardless of the wind. And anytime we're bringing down a Florida golf course, we've got to consider the weather, right? It's usually whipping 10 to 15 miles an hour down here. That's a usual pretty calm day here, but then you have a few days that get nasty and you get 25, 40 mile an hour winds. So it's a little bit early to be talking about the weather here, but make sure to keep an eye on that, as there could be a distinct weather edge to be had if one wave is in significantly harder conditions than the other. Alrighty, I've got Pro Visualizer up. Let's go hole by hole, but first off, want to note that though it is a par 71, there are 4 par 5s on property. There's also an extra par 3, so a little bit unique from that perspective. Hole number 1, a handshake, a par 5, one where you can lay up off the tee or you can bang a driver out there. So some decisions to be had, but pretty much everyone's going to at the very least be greenside in 2. This rough, because it is a little bit more gnarly, does put a premium on hitting this fairway, so I do expect a lot of guys to hit a 3-wood off the tee, but certainly a birdie look for most players. Hole 2, a little bit of a sneaky hard hole. You do have the water to the right, which won't get a bunch of attention this week, but this approach shot, a little bit uphill, and you have this tree blocking off the corner, can cause a few players trouble, and because the green is one of the more severe in property, you are going to see a lot of 3 putts or difficult around the green shots. Hole 3 is 450, the most difficult tee shot on property. You have the water down the right and through the fairway, so most players will play conservative. A lot of them will bail out to the left over here in the rough, which makes this approach shot especially difficult. Now, if you nut up there, hit the fairway, it's going to be about a 9, maybe an 8 iron at the very most, and definitely scoreable, but the tee shot has a high level of difficulty. Hole 4 is a par 3, about 190 yards, one of the more narrow greens on property, relatively straightforward though, is heavily bunkered. Hole 5 is an uphill par 5. It's one of the more difficult holes because you're going to see a lot of bogeys here. It's 611 yards, plays a little bit closer to 630 yards if I have to be honest. It only says it's about like 3 yards uphill, but honestly, I don't buy it. 3 to 10 yards uphill. It plays a lot more than that. It looks a lot more than a 10-yard elevation change. It's one of the smaller greens on property. It's well bunkered as well. Last year, Davis Riley made an 8 on this hole, so showing that difficulty, of course. Hole 6 is 454 yards. It's got one of the tighter chutes on property. So I was mentioning before how it looks like a Carolina course. You can see that aspect, right? It's got that Parkland feel to it. You miss to the left or right, you're going to be chipping out sideways. So hit the fairway. It's relatively straightforward, but if not, you're going to be scrambling. Hole 7 is 414. One of the better birdie looks, I would say, because it's a little bit more open off the tee, one of the wider fairways. Now, with the reduction in fairway size, this might end up being a ribbon this year. It might be a little bit more difficult, but typically one of the easier holes on property. Hole 8 is 233, a long par 3, so nut up, hit a long iron, get it on the surface and 2-putt. Hole 9 is 420 yards, going back the opposite direction. A slight dogleg from left to right, but relatively straightforward. Kind of like hole 7, can be a birdie look if you can get it in the fairway. Hole 10 is 446, so if you're starting on the back 9, not nearly the handshake of hole number 1, right? You have a par 5 there to start on the other side, but still not all that difficult hole, just mid 450 range. Hole 11 is your par 5, so you do get the handshake on hole 2 if you're starting on this side. You're going to see more eagles here. It's slightly uphill for the second shot, but a lot shorter than what you have there for hole 1, leaving players with an iron into this green rather than something like a 3-wood. Hole 12 is 375. You have to lay up here, so it's not going to be borderline drivable like some people might expect. I've seen people hit driver. Most of them fail miserably trying to hit this little sliver over here to the left, but definitely a wedge hole and a birdie look for most players. Hole 13 is way more difficult than people think. This water doesn't look like it's in play, but Keegan Bradley hit it in there a few years ago when he was trying to vie for the lead with Sam Burns, and you're going to see a ton of bogeys at hole 13. It's one of the more exposed holes. You can see you have this whole area to the right where wind can sweep across, and if it's a tailwind, it makes this extremely narrow green hard to hold. It's a sneaky hard hole, especially before one of the more difficult stretches on property here in a few. Hole 14 is your last little bit of respite before an absolute difficult stretch, one of the hardest stretches on the PGA Tour. It's 590. It's not the easiest to reach into. This water hazard to the right really doesn't come in play unless you completely mishit your approach shot. So should be a birdie look for most players, but that's kind of the MO with Innisbrook. These par 5s, you're not going to be handed an eagle chance, right? You're not going to get a 510-yard par 5 like you'll see over there at TPC Sawgrass. Hole 15 is 208 yards and is the precursor to the snake pit. So this isn't even part of the snake pit technically, but a 200-yard par 3. And then we get into the fun holes. Hole 16, the most difficult on property. This tee shot up there with hole number 3 in terms of difficulty. I'd say is a little bit easier because you can bail out to the left unlike the shot there in number 3. But if you don't hit the fairway here, this rough is going to be gnarly, and it's a long iron shot into an extremely severe green. Hole 17 is 212, one of the longer par 3s, and this is the green, I would say, with the most undulation on the entire property. So good luck even two-putting when you get it on the surface. And hole 18 doesn't look all that crazy, but the approach shot and the tee shot both play uphill. These bunkers to the right are some of the most penal on the PGA Tour, and the green, though it's massive, you can see one of the larger surfaces on the entire property is, again, kind of like the last two greens, one of the more severe on property. So from the ball striking perspective, none of them are like 500-yard par 5s. They're not 250-yard par 3s, right? It's just like 220 over there for hole number at 17. But because of how difficult these green complexes can be and how firm and fast they run over the weekend, you're going to see bogeys and double bogeys galore there over that stretch. All right, now that we've seen the golf course, let's go ahead and go through our key metrics for analysis that I'll be using to identify my top plays of the week. And at no surprise, at number 1, we've got shots gained approach. Always going to be up there, number 1 or 2 on the list. But this week, especially important. And as the reason I say that is you take a look at some of the recent champions, and especially the correlation data, when you're looking, the correlations between some of these key metrics and the finishing positions over the years. Number 1 key stat is shots gained approach. And if you take a look at all the courses on the PGA Tour, in fact, it's number 5 on tour in that category. So something that's already important, and I'm maybe weighing a little bit more this week, but especially some of the long iron ranges, those tough par 4s, especially some of them where you're forced to lay up off the tee, you're going to have something like 160 to 200 yards in. So trying to hone in on that 150 to 175 yard range, that 175 to 200 yard range, and even some of those 200 plus yard ranges for those hard, reachable par 5s, right? There's still 4 on property despite it being the par 71. So always an important stat, especially when you're looking for some of those top end finishers. At number 2, we've got shots gained putting on the Bermuda grass with overseed. We're trying to take a look at some of the premier putters because just like a shots gained approach, shots gained putting is one of the most important stats at this course. In relative, when you compare it to the rest of the PGA Tour, it's one of the more important stats there too, ranking top 15 in the tour in that category. So these greens are a little bit different than what you saw there for the API or the Honda, kind of similar to ones at Sawgrass where it's that overseed with that POA Tribolus overseed. They have the same kind of greens at PGA West, a few other courses towards the beginning here of the schedule in 2023. So you want to take a look at those putting numbers. But if you are going to take a look at Bermuda, I don't hate that either. There's some correlation to be had there, especially because Sam Burns, right, 2-time champion here, is perhaps the best Bermuda grass putter in the world. And at number 3, we've got shots gained off the tee with slightly more emphasis this week on the distance. Usually this is one of the more demanding off the tee courses. I talked about that extensively as I went through our hole by hole breakdown, but with the longer rough, also the constricted fairways, it's going to be even more impactful this week. And in fact, I almost made it number 2 on this list. The only reason I didn't is because of all that correlation data. Of course, that's pointing us in that direction. I'm a numbers guy at heart, right? It's hard for me to ignore that. But given some of the changes, I think the narrative this year is going to be a little bit more focused off the tee than what you're used to seeing. So that's something that I'm including in my analysis a little bit more this year than most. A few other things to consider: par 5 scoring. A lot of the low scores are going to come on those par 5s. A lot of the top end finishers have been known for their par 5 prowess. Taking a look at shots gained approach at Bermuda rough, taking a look at shots gained during the Florida swing. A lot of those quote unquote Florida golfers have had a lot of success down here. And of course, taking a look at some of my comp courses, which we're going to get into right now. In terms of comps, at number 1, I've got the Bay Hill Club and Lodge. And the reason why I have Bay Hill number 1 this year, it was, I believe, like number 2 or 3 last year, is because of the gnarly rough, right? From them taking it from 2.5, 3-inch rough to 3.75 inches is a little bit more reminiscent of Bay Hill than any other course. You already got those difficult greens. You've got a lot of speed to them. You've got Florida golf with the winds, and it's really started to give me those kind of vibes. So though from the visual perspective, there's not nearly as many trees around Bay Hill, in fact, hardly any trees there on property, I do think that the skill set is going to be very similar for what you want there at Bay Hill to what you're going to end up wanting this week. So definitely looking at that. Was still looking at it last year. I just think maybe it's a little bit of better comp this time around. At number 2, we've got Eastlake Golf Club, another course with Bermuda grass, gnarly rough over there, an off the tee course, an approach course for sure. And what I like here is some of the elevation changes, right? At Eastlake, there's a lot of flat holes up there around Atlanta, but there's 5 or 6 holes, kind of similar to what you're going to get here at the Valspar, where you're getting that little bit of elevation change. So it's got the Parkland style fairways, the little chutes on plenty of holes, very similar to what you're going to get here at Innisbrook. So another track that I was looking at last year and looking at once again. And lastly, we've got TPC Southwind, and I think from the off the tee perspective, I really like what you've got for the FedEx St. Jude. You've got a lot of those holes where you have to lay up. Gnarly rough, which was actually a little bit gnarlier this year at Southwind, was something I wasn't considering as much last year, but especially as I was going hole by hole, looking at some of the demanding shots off the tee, kind of thinking through TPC Southwind in that same kind of vein, there's a lot of similar looks. So another difficult track with a lot of water, and though it's not in Florida, right, it's Memphis up there, it's kind of got that Florida feel to it. I mean, a lot of the comp courses we're looking at when we're playing Southwind are courses over here like an Innisbrook Copperhead course. So definitely all three of those make sense. You can take a look at the Honda Classic, you can take a look at TPC Sawgrass as the same kind of greens, and has that Parkland style feel to it as well in a few holes. So I think that's an adequate comp you can make. And then I'd say PGA West, just from like the ball striking perspective, it's got that decent amount of water in play. Tee shots are similarly difficult. I think you could take a look at that as well for a few comps. That is all I've got for this week's course breakdown. Hopefully you guys feel a little bit more prepared for your research process, getting into your DFS, your outright bets. Before you hop on out of here, go ahead, comment down below what you think the winning score is going to be. Do you think that gnarly rough is going to maybe have an impact here? Do you think weather, that high wind that we can get here down here in Florida, might go out there and impact play? I sure think so. So I'm going to take 9 under par is the winner, so I'm going to go a little bit aggressive there, really say that impacts play. But go ahead, let me know your thoughts down there in the comments, and as per usual, guys, I appreciate all the support here on the channel, you guys coming by, consuming the content. If you guys haven't already, go ahead and smash that like button. It goes a long way with helping me grow the channel, get it out there to more people and whatnot. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss any of the content in the future. We're going to be posting DFS videos, going through my core plays, value plays, all that sort of fun stuff. We'll have our live stream on Wednesday. That'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern, talking about what to expect this week, both from the wind and, of course, DFS and prop perspective. Also go over any of your questions there, so make sure to stop on by. Won't be there for the Pro-Am, or at least not as of right now, going to go for the Pro-Am, but I'll be there for Thursday through Sunday on site. So you'll have some boots on property. When we do our showdown streams, going to have a lot of insight on that end. And of course, just looking forward to seeing some top end play. Until next time, guys, best of luck with all of those lineups, any outright bets that you decide to go with, and let's go ahead and crush this week.